So a few days ago, I made a comment on Twitter about how I really didn't have a lot of time to record the scripts that I was writing, and Fatman sarcastically replied with this image, implying that it's what I could do with the scripts, if I couldn't record them. Well, lo and behold, I was going to make that the entire focus of my opening skit segment. And then my computers decided to stop associating with my printer, and I couldn't actually print out my script. And on top of that, I'm also shit at origami, so I couldn't make the hat either. So I wasted maybe about a good 4 hours on trying to get all that solved. But hey, now I have a legitimate excuse why this is late, right? Right? Right?
So, as should be apparent in the last installment, I'm terrible at planning these fixing videos ahead of time, as now I'm adding yet another section before addressing the series proper. I'll give you all a minute to chuckle at the irony of that reality, considering my key criticism of RWBY itself has been focused around the writers not planning ahead. Actually, I lied. I want to rip this series off as quickly as possible, like the blood-sopped bandit it is on my soul. To do that, I'm going to need to address a few issues I neglected to address in my last video, typically because there were more pressing elements that needed clarification or tweaking. Luckily, these elements all tie together rather diegetically, so combining them all under the umbrella of history is pretty easy, but the unlucky thing about them is that they're all arguably parts of the lore that need the most revision, so if you thought my changes in part 1 were extreme, you've not seen anything yet. First and foremost, faunus, which in canon no one seems to have any idea where they came from and behave in a way that's not compatible with basic biology. So the biggest change here is establishing that humans and faunus both directly evolved from a common ancestor and are able to interbreed. Humans, for their part, evolved as generalists, a populace that can survive in most environments, barring certain extremes. Faunus evolved from the common ancestor in response to more harsh environments where food was scarce or the climate was unfavorable and specialized to survive. The most common faunus have mammalian traits due to evolution in temperate climates with lack of food. These evolutions are the most mundane among faunus, typically only granting the person heightened forms of sight, like night vision, improved hearing, and some small inkling of animal instinct. Faunus that developed in more extreme areas tend to reflect the animals around them, such as chameleon faunus having defensive cloaking ability, or scorpion faunus having an offensive poison. With these benefits, however, come some detriments for the faunus, primarily when it comes to mating and reproduction in a modern society. Faunus genetically are unstable, as such conceiving children is effectively a crapshoot. If two faunus of the same type mate, they have the highest chances of conceiving, and they'll conceive a child of the same faunus subtype. Breeding with a human is a little less consistent, and typically the child produced favors the mother's species, though it's not an exclusive fact. The most inconsistent breeding occurs between faunus of two subtypings, where conception is actually quite difficult due to the more dramatic differences in biology, though the child can take on traits of either parent. In addition, faunus have a heat cycle on top of the normal breeding habits of humanity, which is an evolutionary drive that tries to account for the less than guaranteed birth rate. Interactions between humans and faunus, however, are not peaceful, especially in these early years of existence. Faunus, being superior in specific circumstances, earn jealous ire from humans who feel outclassed by the faunus' extraordinary abilities. On the other hand, faunus feel overlooked and unappreciated by humans thanks to a number of unique issues that crop up from their animal traits, such as light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, and the frustration that comes with an unfulfilled heat. These grating forces become the first underlying tensions between the two that'll eventually expand into the full-blown race war we've heard so much about. This level of tension between humans and faunus differs from region to region, from faunus subspecies to subspecies. This has led to any number of racial slurs against the faunus, such as fur-licker and lizard-brain, to name a few. Oddly enough, faunus itself used to be considered a racial slur, as originally the different subspecies identified as their own unique races. However, in light of there being too many diverse types of faunus, the name stuck as the common shorthand terminology. It can still be used insensitively, denoted by inflection, but it's generally accepted in polite conversation when used amicably. Now, the Kingdoms of Remnant are another topic I never touched upon in the first video due to time, but they are probably the second major piece of the lore that needs complete overhauling. There are a lot of things to be said about how poorly Rooster Teeth introduced the kingdoms to the show, namely how, when described initially, they weren't really kingdoms. Now, that's been somewhat fixed in the more recent World of Remnants, but I still feel it's an unsatisfactory elaboration. So let's go back to the beginning and start with how each kingdom formed. Vacuo is the easiest, since the most basic human and faunus families tribalize in their first steps of civilization. And that's primarily what Vacuo is, a series of tribes. The people of Vacuo are typically laid back and relaxed due to the abundant natural resources and a typically calmer climate. Due to the rather calm conditions, faunus did not evolve too frequently in Vacuo, making them a smaller fraction of the population, but it also means there was little reason for conflict between the two species, so relations between the two grew quite peacefully throughout the years. Eventually, the tribes of Vacuo, in the face of both the grim and larger outside nations, began to rally behind one tribe whose leader became known as the Nomad King, and helped maintain peace in Vacuo up until the Great War. This form of kingdom was rather relaxed and fluid, with the Nomad King and his lineage being seen as great wise rulers. The populace of Vacuo's emphasis on relaxation became a natural deterrent to the grim, and what are typically treated as more mundane and regular occasions are treated with fanfare and celebration. Vale, meanwhile, evolved very much in line with how the British monarchy did, with fiefdoms, feudalism, and nobility, only instead the formation of the Magna Carta and the American Revolution happened simultaneously, with the corrupt monarchy being chained down to better represent the people. This eventually leads to a monarch who truly adores his people and will go on to become the warrior king featured in the Great War. In the wake of this reformation, focus is put on individual fulfillment as a means of enlightenment and as a way to deter grim, the idea being that a fulfilled person will feel no negative emotions beyond immediate emotional or physical injury. Celebration in Vale revolves primarily around the arts of the individual and upon individual accomplishment, which does well to create hardworking and generally happy populace. This also leads to a significant emphasis upon equality through individualism, so typically speaking, Vale is the second least racist kingdom towards the faunus. Mantle, thanks to the cold of its surroundings, worked well at deterring grim, allowing the populace to advance their technology far quicker than any other culture. As a trade-off, however, the society is far more prone to allowing negative emotions to fester, and as such the average Mantle citizen will be more brusque, blunt, and overall unpleasant in comparison to members of the other nations. With the cold climate, the need to stick together became more ingrained in the populace, so the community of Mantle formed around group efforts to create. The most prominent arts and scientific developments of the nation are usually created by a wide-threaded community that spans the continent. Eventually, a leader emerges to shape each project, and once more modern society begins to form, a national leader is called for by the populace. Naturally, it is the finest of these project leaders who is chosen to lead, becoming a figure known as the architect, who passes down the title to a chosen successor. While not a traditional monarchy, this more socialist society is regularly called a kingdom due to its similar leadership structure. Celebration in Mantle usually only comes after the major completion of a large group project, or with the ascension of new leadership to power. As odd as it may sound, the population in Mantle was largely faunus, especially adapted to the cold climates. Humans, meanwhile, became the premier pushers of scientific advancement in order to make comfortable lives in such hostile conditions. Due to their resilience, faunus were envied by the human populace, and thus when mining and hard labor became steady lines of work, the faunus became easy targets of slave labor. With technological advances, the humans managed to ensnare their faunus cousins, even with their superior numbers backing them up. Eventually, this led to a balancing out of the population between faunus and humans, and a key fracture between humans and faunus in the kingdom, which would later bleed over into the rest of society at large with the advent of mass communication after the Great War. Modern Mistral didn't actually start out as just Mistral. Instead, it originated from a larger kingdom of the same name and a small confederacy called the Sartodakis Alliance. The larger Mistral developed on plentiful grasslands, excelling at farming, and ultimately developed into the Asiatic culture that dominated Volume 4. Due to the relatively wide open spaces in the country, archery became the order of the day, developing an armed forces composed of mounted samurai who were all loyal to a central emperor who rose to power through infighting and subterfuge. Sartodakis developed in the bogs and archipelagos to the south as a nation of traders reminiscent of the Greek city-states. To that end, Saurodachus became a middleman for Mistral when trading food north to Mantle, since the Alliance were far more skilled sailors, as well as a prominent fighting force that trained to fight Grimm in difficult terrains thanks to local geography. Typically, Mistral's cultural celebrations focus on the changing of the seasons and harvesting cycles, while Saurodachus' celebrations came in light of trade deals and other economic successes. This is the status of the world before the Great War, with 5 major factions at play. Some smaller nations that existed around the globe will also take part, as will the Faunus as a united community, but when compared to the large-scale conflict that comes in the Great War, these are the only 5 nations that really matter. Sorry for not diving much into more detail, but this interpretation is already making my nose bleed with the ultimate complexity, so forgive me if there are a few details that I'm going to skim over. So now we have the stage all set for the Great War. The catalyst to the war was actually a series of trade deals and unspoken alliances that ended up conflicting between the 5 nations. And before anyone says this sounds like the Phantom Menace Part 2, all this information serves to inform the setting, not necessarily the direct plot. It's also mostly told through environmental detail and cultural norms expressed during the show's run. The first major road towards the war starts with Mistral trading food to Mantle via the Saurodachus Alliance, because Mantle's climates are poor for crop production, and due to that close relationship, Mistral has a military alliance with Mantle. Vale, however, then begins to trade with Mantle, outproducing Mistral in terms of low-quality but mass-produced food, cutting into Mistral's sales and leading to economic strife in an economically driven kingdom. This strife came to a head during a joint art exhibit between Mistral, Mantle, and the Saurodachus alignment, where Grimm suddenly attacked in bulk. Due to the chaos, what actually caused the attack was lost to the annals of history. That didn't stop Mistral from taking the opportunity to blame a Saurodachus extremist group for the attack and declare war on the Alliance in order to cut out the middleman. Even with superior warriors, the Saurodachus Alliance fell to the sheer numbers of the Mistrali military and was annexed. In addition, Mantle interpreted the attack in their own way, seemingly observing that art and self-expression attracted the Grimm, an inference that leads to the outlawing of art and self-expression in the already community-focused kingdom. At the same time, Vacuo was negotiating land ownership of a small nearby territory with the Saurodachus Alliance. Mistral, now in control of the former Saurodachus Alliance territory, claims the territory belongs to them, but the trade deal wasn't finished, leading to a conflict that sparks into a war with Vacuo. Vale and Mantle, who had remained neutral, were allied with Vacuo and Mistral respectively and jumped into support, ultimately culminating in a world-scale war. What small countries remain around the world jumped in to fight for their own political or economic reasons on either side of the conflict, only to collapse first when the resources and supplies began to get scarce. With their warriors absent or injured in the war effort, they are easily overrun by the Grimm and wiped off the map. There were a number of notable engagements, including Mistral breaking a major wartime taboo by luring Grimm to the battlefield, which wiped out their opponents, only to, in response, lose an equal number of troops when they moved in to claim the territory. In another, Vacuo and Vale have their entire fleets wiped out by the superior sailing of the Saurodachus Alliance, now controlled by Mistral, combined with Mantle's superior naval technology. The ultimate battle of the war came during a Mistralian campaign to take Vacuo's mines in the eastern desert, only to be met by forces personally led by Vale's king. With his cunning, skill, Vacuo's unnaturally violent weather, Mistral's inability to fight in the desert, and Mantle's strictly enforced philosophies leading to low morale, it was a key decisive victory that left the Mistral-Mantle land forces absolutely crippled. This perfect storm of a battle led to the meeting at Vital, where Mistral, Mantle, and Vacuo were ready to bend knee to Vale, the one military that had weathered the war relatively unscathed and poised to rule the world. Instead, the aging king of Vale pushed for the kingdoms to disperse their power to the people, creating elected councils that would govern the different populaces without input from the monarchies, all of whom abdicated their powers to become figureheads for their people. The 4 huntsman combat schools were also arranged in this time, and slavery was outlawed, freeing the Faunus globally. This, however, had dire implications for Mantle, whose ground forces had taken the brunt of the losses in the final battle. The freed Faunus of the kingdom, now no longer legally oppressed, lashed out against their former mistreatment, leading to a localized uprising that killed the king and the newly elected council. The other 3 kingdoms came to Mantle's aid and quelled the violence, so the damage was done and the relations between humans and Faunus and Mantle was permanently damaged and the kingdom left unruled. Hunters from the newly minted Atlas Combat School stepped in to keep order and ultimately rose to become a governing council of their own, creating what would be referred to as the Atlas Round Table, though most people refer to it as the Kingdom of Atlas in reverence for Mantle's fall, despite the lack of a monarch. Even after abdicating his throne, the former King of Vale still held great political sway and ultimately tried to quell the still growing tensions among the Faunus, offering menagerie to them as an all-Faunus nation, as an olive branch alongside Atlas's council. While many Faunus were welcoming of the offer, many more saw it as a slight considering menagerie's harsher climates and topography, as well as seen as a way to rid the four kingdoms of the Faunus altogether. This, as well as continued discrimination from within Mantle, Mistral, and to a much lesser extent Vale, led to a global uprising of the Faunus, who waged a guerrilla military campaign against the kingdoms, all of whom were still recovering from the war. It became especially dire when many of the remaining soldiers, who had fought alongside Faunus allies in the Great War, were reluctant to take up arms against old friends. The worst, however, came when Vale's king passed away of old age while in peace talks with the generals, having conceded many of the Faunus' demands with the last vestiges of his power, while not properly informing any other diplomats. This leads Vale to direct all four kingdoms to ultimately concede to the Faunus' demands: equal rights, equal protections, and menagerie. While a healthy population of humans found the deal agreeable, a notable segment feel that the deal was not handled legally and felt shorted by the concessions, seen as a last act of a delusional old king and leading to a steady rise in nationalism globally. With these demands fulfilled, a general peace filtered over the world, especially with the establishment of the CCT, but it would ultimately last only so long, bringing us to just before the events of the series. By this point, 90 years have passed since the start of the Great War, 80 years since it ended, and 70 years since the Faunus Rebellion. Regulation regarding Faunus working conditions have slowly fallen by the wayside, and enforcement is lax, doubly so in Vacuo, with its lackadaisical nature, where several Atlas and Mistral companies still run mines and other hard labor enterprises. This mistreatment leads to the formation of the White Fang, and finally flows into the trailers in the start of Volume 1. Holy shit, you have no idea how stressful it was to write all of this. Penning the intricacies of an entire world's geopolitical outlook isn't exactly a walk in the park. So what did all of this fix? Well, for one, the strife for the Faunus is infinitely easier to grasp. Hell, it arguably makes more sense in this setting to be racist than in reality, while also being that much deeper in concept. It also helped explain some of the more bizarre choices of the series, like the fact that Mistral had two very clear cultural influences that weren't inherently compatible, and the fact that Mantle outlawed the arts for some seemingly inexplicable reason. It also directly alleviates the conflicting terminology used for the kingdoms, what with them being councils in the present day. But with all of that said, this is only my opinion to how the story should have been handled. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button down below, and if you're new to the channel and want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. If you have your own thoughts on the topic, please slap them down into the comments below. If you disagree with me, feel free to let me know. This series is just as much yours as it is mine, and I'd love to hear the ideas you have, even if they're contradictory to mine. I read every comment, folks, and just as with part 1, I'm going to do a response video in order to address your suggestions and criticism. Special thanks to Moderately Entertained and FamtanFalling for their help writing this video, and a big thank you to everyone who supported the last installment. Now, with all the groundwork set, I can finally flow into the events of the series proper. When I'll get to it, I don't know, but I've got plenty of ideas that have spent way too long unsaid. Until then, though, catch you on the flip side. Hey there! If you liked the video, please hit that like button down below, or even leave a message in the comments. If you're interested in more content like this, check out the rest of the channel, as well as our Facebook page and my Twitter handle. If you'd like updates on our newest content, hit that subscribe button so our news of our most recent work reaches you as fast as possible. And if you're feeling especially generous today, please check out our Patreon page. It's thanks to you, our faithful fans and followers, that we can make the content that we love. Please keep up that support, and as always, we'll catch you on the flip side.